Welcome to this GrassCheckGB webinar. It's another version of how we manage grass, and this time it's about rotational grazing and using electrical fencing. So we're going to hear from Mars livestock today, and we've got Peter Stoker presenting, and then he will be joined by his colleague John Frizzell to answer technical questions. So grazing management's about having control over how much grass is consumed, and about resting pasture or fields after it's been grazed so it can recover. But to get that control, often the fields aren't the right size for how much you're wanting to allocate to stock. So what we need is a way of flexibly altering how much we can feed animals. And this is where electrical fencing helps on any farm. It allows you to subdivide areas and feed the pasture amounts you want to the animals you want for the period you want. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from these speakers today. So Mars are one of the sponsors. There's a group of sponsors. If I just read them all out by name, we've got AHDB, Hubicum Cymru, QMS Scotland, Cortiva, Germinal, Handley Enterprises, who also specialise in measuring grass volumes and amounts that you've got on feed. There's Ciantec, who do the testing of GrassCheck, and Waitrose are also a key sponsor through some of their farms. And the results are put out through Farmers Guardian and the Scottish Farmer. But today, the nub of it is how do we control grass and how much we offer, and what are the ways to do that that are flexible and easy to use. So I'm going to pass straight over to Peter to get started on that. Over to you, Peter.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. Myself and John are going to be talking to you about rotational grazing and electric fencing. So that was a great introduction, and that's really what it's all about. We're going to, nice line. Oh, there we go. We're going to be talking about grazing grass a little bit, getting started. But I think it's good to say that whether you're experienced in this area or just getting started, we hope we've got something in there for you. So excuse me if I go into a little bit of basic right at the start, but I just want to sort of build the picture up. So grazing grass and getting started with rotational grazing and electric, that's where I'm beginning. And then we'll get into energizers, permanent and temporary electric. So we'll compare and contrast the two, and then top earthing tips. So if you're quite experienced in this area, hopefully there's something in it at the end. If you're just getting started, like I said, I'm trying to put together the whole picture so we can sort of see everything, and then everybody can take something away from it tonight. So if we start on grazing grass, and we all know that the UK is a very, very good place to do this, like New Zealand, and other areas where you get a bit of sunshine, plenty of rain. And we know that grazed grass is the cheapest and the most natural food that we can feed our animals. And that's a very, very important point. Half the grass grown, though, can be wasted. So there's an awful lot we can do to improve our productivity, get our stocking rates up. Grazed grass can provide 85–95% of what natural energy requirements we need for finishing our beef and in our sheep systems. We can lower the input costs and reliance on bought-in feeds. And the market that we're serving for high-quality meat, consider this as a premium. People want to know what they're eating. And feeding and finishing animals on conserved forages and pasture gain a premium, which is good news for us. There's a lot said about, we need to reduce red meat consumption, etc. Maybe we do, but what's wrong with the stuff that you are eating being of the best quality it can be from the UK? And as you can see on the screen grab there, other people are talking about this. The health benefits of eating grass-fed beef, for example, in this very interesting study that Newcastle University did, which was looking at the omega-3 fats and the anti-inflammatory properties they contain. You know, they're definitely onto something. It's a good news story. You know, and to be part of the solution, not the problem, is a great thing. You know, and for us as an organisation, Data Mars Livestock, supporting, you know, the UK farming industry, it's great to be able to do this and being part of the solution, like I said, to reduce our carbon footprint and, you know, capture carbon in our grasslands. You know, some of the grasslands in the UK, we can't do anything else with them. So it's great to be able to use it and do that and produce something that's natural and ethically produced. And there's a market for it, you know, and this is a good news story. So it's great to be a part of it. Approaches to grazing. I mean, we can look at the annual yield, the dry matter tons per hectare you're getting, the utilization of the stuff that you're growing, the usable yield, you know, what we can actually use that we're growing, and then the percentage increase as we move down the different grazing techniques we can use. So we're looking at set stocking, then we're going down to continuous grazing or relaxed rotational grazing. Then we get down into rotational grazing and paddock grazing and frequent moves. So if we go right up to the top again, this is where we start. Set stocking. You put a certain number of animals in the field at the start of the season and you perhaps take them out at the end. You know, there's limited control there. You know, you do have to go and look after them and check them, you know, mostly every day. So, you know, saying that it, you know, there's a lot less labor is maybe not the case. You still got to go and look after them and such, make sure everybody's okay. You've got limited control over what's going on in the field with the sward height. You know, they're grazing often a large area for a long period of time over the season. You know, there could be wet periods that can have quite an effect on it. And the utilization of grazed grass, that percentage, we could be saying here that it's 50%, or it could even be less than that. You know, a lot going to waste. So there's the sort of starting point, if you like. You know, there's a lot of systems use this. But if we looked at some of the other ways to do it, some of the other approaches, continuous grazing or relaxed rotational grazing. Now, that gives you limited control over your sward height, but you've still got some control. You know, the stock can be a bit picky, and you got to make sure that, you know, finishers, lambs and such, mustn't have limited intake. You know, they've got to get enough of the good stuff to do what they need to do. You know, if we're hitting those magic numbers of 250 grams a day on lambs, you know, they've got to have plenty in front of them. But as you can see already, you know, the utilization of grazed grass, if we can get it up to say 60% in this area, you know, we're already, you know, going 20% better. Let's go down to now rotational grazing, where you are moving around on a regular basis. You've got reasonable grazing pressure, so you're getting the stuff to grow the way you're wanting it to. We'll come to that in a bit. And you've got good control over your sward height. So, you know, they're able to get what they need at the height that they need, which has the nutrition that it needs. And as you can see, you know, the annual yield, the dry matter tons per hectare, you know, that is going up massively. And the usable dry matter and everything else is going up in the right direction, you know. And look at the percentage increase compared to where we started up here. You know, we're going much better already. Then if you go really down to the bottom here, paddock grazing and frequent moves, you've got very good control over your sward, and you know, you really are maximizing what you've got. And all these benefits, I mean, you're putting more stock on the same ground, and they're getting more out of it, and you're improving what's there. You know, this is also key as well. When we start talking about doing this, it doesn't mean that you've got to go in and rip everything out and reseed right from the start. You can get more out of what you've got. And also on this matrix here, you know, set stocking at the top or getting right down into paddock grazing here. Your system may be somewhere in between. And it's up to you to use what you've got at the moment, infrastructure-wise, and then introducing this possibly into just one area or, you know, or a certain part of your farm, and then seeing what you're going to be getting out of it, and the improvements you make. You're not going to have to go away and take more land. You're going to get more out of what you've got, and you'll improve what you've got. And then you can start looking, you know, at other things. I mean, the other thing that goes hand in hand with this is get on top of your pH and see what's going on. And then look at your nitrate, your phosphate, your potash, you know, using things that you possibly have got, like your muck and everything else, you know, before you have to go out, you know, to the fertilizer bag to get what you need. Then you can also look at reseeding as well, etc. And, you know, that can give you benefits. But firstly, I would say, you know, this improves what you have, and then you're going to get productivity improvements from that. Now, getting started in rotational grazing, and like we've said, rotational grazing and electric fencing. We're saying that the two, you know, are going hand in hand because it's far better using electric when you're doing this, because it gives you so many benefits. Here are some of them, the benefits of using electric if you're not doing it already. The improvement of your pastures. You can subdivide a larger paddock, and that greatly improves the use of that land. You can then allow the paddock to recover, and if you want to eat it out, and then you can put more muck on it or some fertilizer. So it's like I said, it's improving what you've got. Then if we start thinking about electric, you can reduce the injuries that your stock may receive from a fence. You know, barbed wire is designed to give them a tickle and keep them off, but you know, it can also have a downside where they injure themselves. But when they get a good kick from an electric fence, it makes them realize that they've got to respect it and keep off it. So you are reducing injury. I mean, the other thing to say is you can't just set them in on electric if they've never been used to it. There's got to be a bit of education here so that they get used to what's going on, because, you know, that can cause problems from the start, which you don't want to. You know, you've got to think about what you're doing and what the animals don't know and what you're trying to teach them. And then by doing that and they get used to the fence and they respect it, you will reduce the injuries and such that they get. Electric's durable, and it's less prone to damage because they're not rubbing and leaning and pushing through the fence, you know, to get to that good bit. Even if you've got a barb on the top, you know, they're leaning over and reaching for that extra bit. That doesn't really happen when you've got electric, because they're going to get a kick and they're going to keep off it. So again, just for the nature of how it works, it's protecting itself essentially, you know, from any damage that you know, big beasts and such may be doing. And when they're all pushing each other, and then that all starts when they're in corners and such. Electric will give one a good kick, and he says, "I'm not going near that." It's also flexible. The wire spacings and the fence types can be designed, you know, for the way you want to do it and the different kinds of animals. You may even be wanting to keep things out of certain areas. You know, and electric fencing can definitely help you do that. There's very much a lower construction cost here. It requires less material and labor when you're putting them up. When you're comparing it to a conventional non-electrified fence. And I mean, a lot of people also are saying, you know, that fence posts aren't lasting as long as they used to do. You know, they're rotting out more, so you're having to go in and replace them. I mean, you're still using often wood poles on electric, but you're using less of them, so that, you know, there's less chance of that happening. It's very portable as well, electric. It's fast to build if you're strip grazing, you know, and you can move it around a lot easier because of the nature of what it is. You know, you're just putting poles in and stringing wires on reels. So there's a lot of benefits there to using electric. I'll now cover some top tips on rotational grazing and using electric. I mean, the first thing that everybody says is you need to keep it simple. You don't need complicated software. You don't need plate meters. All of this can be done later. You know, if you're just starting out, focus on the infrastructure and the stocking rates that you're going to do, and everything else can come later on. You know, and when you become a grass geek and you see the benefits and everything else, a lot of these other, you know, layers, essentially, if you like, of management can be added, and you get benefit, and the payback is brilliant on them too. But just at the start, keep it simple. You know, everything else could come later. You know, just get started with it. Do it in, you know, a little part of the farm. Tip number 2, use quality products. If you're new to electric, don't, you know, put yourself off by using poor quality. You know, electric travels along a fence line with no resistance. That's how electric likes to travel. And if you've got leakages, you know, the leakages might be on the, you know, the bits on the fence or the poles, you know, any of the accessories you're putting on, you know, the underground cable you're using, or, you know, connecting between gateways or anything like that, that can affect how it works for you. That and earthing, but we'll talk about earthing later. So use good quality stuff. You know, invest. You know, you're getting going. You know, just on some temporary stuff. Get into some geared reels that have that 3-to-1, so that when you're winding those rolls of wire up, you know, I've done it many times myself. If you have a geared reel, you're going much quicker than one without. You know, get yourself a pack of pigtails or multi-wire, you know, tread-ins, and get some decent quality poly wire or braid or whatever you're going to use, but get something decent that gives you good conductivity, and away you go. The other thing you need, of course, is an energizer. You know, get a decent one. It doesn't happen to be the great biggest thing on the market. You know, get one that fits the area you're wanting to cover. But we'll talk a bit about that a bit later on. But get something decent. Tip number 3: split fields into a 24-day rotation. You know, start say with 6 or 8 paddocks, and you're going to rotate every 4 or 3 days, and that is your rotation. You know, it all depends on the stocking rate, the lay quality, you know, what your pH is, what your MP and K is like. Of course it does. But there's a good starting point. You know, 24-day rotation like that. And as a rule of thumb, you know, how many animals will this cover off? Try 6 to 8 sheep per hectare, or a cow and a calf. You know, something like that, and away you go. Tip number 4, the water. Now, you need to have a think about this from the start as well. But, you know, have a look at your field, your paddock, and the shape it is. Where is the water point? You know, can you use that water point for a number of your paddocks? That's good. But when you're designing them, you know, they don't have to be perfectly straight and parallel and everything. You know, you may be able to use, you know, a couple of paddocks that use the same trough. But also watch that you're not going to get too much trampling and, you know, moving backwards if you're saying they're having to go right up to the top corner to get into the water. You may have to say, okay, we need a central water point. Let's go into the middle, you know, and you're going to run some poly pipe and then put your trough there, so then they can use it. I think the important thing, though, is to not limit how much water they're taking on. You know, if the trough's not big enough with cows and such, they need to have access to enough of it, because then that's going to defeat what you're trying to do if you don't get that right. But again, you know, it doesn't have to be a massive barrier. You know, there's a lot we can do with polypipe and other things that can be moved around. Tips 5 and 6. Now, you put stock in, say, when it's about ankle height, which for cows, which will be about 2,700 to 3,000 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. And that's about the height that they like them. You know, remove them when it's about 1,500. So you're not grazing it out down to the wick. You know, you're leaving plenty cover so that it has time to recover and get better. So when you come round on your rotation again, it's ready again for you. Sheep obviously like it a bit lower than that, but again, you're not wanting to graze it out completely. I mean, there's other things going on here. When you're moving around like that, you've got to think about, say, the worm burden, you know, what your resistance is like. If you're using your fecal egg counts before your worm, and then do a worm, and then do a fecal egg count after that, and then you can see what resistance you've got to that particular type of wormer. And also, it's how far you're grazing it down as well. That can affect how many worms they're picking up. I mean, I was on an AHDB strategic farm last week with Stephen Lawson at Hallington in Northumberland, and he's working with Liz Jennifer, and they were saying, we're going to keep a bit more cover on the pastures as he's rotationally grazing, because he's not wanting them to pick as many worms up. They're feeling that that's a strategy they're going to take. And then coming in behind them are going to be dry ewes and cows that are going to be mopping up loads of those worm larvae. And you know, that's a sort of conscious decision that they're making in their rotational grazing system. But again, it's understanding your individual circumstances, and you know, since I'm talking about parasites, knowing where you are with it. You know, try and find out if you've got worm resistance and what the burden is. And that's something to factor in. And you know, you can also talk to your vet about it and say, I'm wanting to start getting into some rotational grazing, but you're not doing it. What implications does this have for me? And then once you've grazed it down to where you want it, you're taking them off, like I said, not grazing it too low, and then move them into paddock with the most grass. And if it's getting ahead of you, you may say we need to move them a bit quicker, and you may do that as well. So that's tip 5. And then tip 6, when we're actually talking about growing the stuff. And if we're talking about the ryegrass here, it grows in a 3-leaf cycle. So graze it at 2.5 to 3, because you're getting it when it's nutritious and the stock like it, and it's also going to give it a chance to recover. Because if you're grazing it too far down, it isn't going to get to do that. And if they're going in and it's longer than that, you know, they may not want to take as much of it up, and it's losing some of the nutrition in there. You know, recovery is key as well. So yeah, make sure there's plenty there so that you can come around again in 3 weeks' time. And again, when you're talking to the vet about the worm burden and stuff, there's a lot that can be achieved there without just having to rely on, you know, filling them up with wormer, because, you know, that's not what we want to be doing, to make sure that, you know, we're not building in resistance. And certainly, you know, a lot of the chat last week was also about using those, you know, group 4 and 5 wormers in the back end and such to clear them out. And any biosecurity as well, you know, putting animals in a paddock that you brought in, again, because maybe you've separated your paddocks off, you know, and you can give them a good dose of the 4 and 5 stuff to clean them out, so you're not bringing in problems that you don't actually have in the first place. So tips 7 and 9. Tip 7, you know, like I said earlier on in the presentation, electric fencing is not expensive. So some metrics to put to that, you know, it can be around 30 pence or 90 pence a meter versus traditional fencing, which may be 5 quid or 7 quid. You know, I mean, again, how long's a piece of string? But those are sort of ballpark figures and you can see that the difference is quite significant. Yes, you may have to put more in if you're splitting fields, but honestly, the benefits far outweigh the costs, the additional costs that you're bringing in there. That really is the case. It's reducing the feed that you're giving, it's increasing the stocking rate, and by the nature of what you're doing, you're grazing it down, then you're bringing them off, then it's coming back, you're grazing them down. You're improving your soil structure, and you're getting that thatch out and anything that's in there. You can also look at your reseeding policies. I mean, I did say earlier on, you can improve what you've got, but then you can also say, well, actually, we've been doing this now, and that patch there isn't giving us what we want. So, we need to do something with it. So you may rip it out and then, get to where you want to and get that daily live weight gain up. But again, look at your pH, look at your NPK, all those things factor in, get you where you want to get to on rotational grazing. And when you're putting it in, for cattle, you could go 12 meters apart with 1 or 2 lines of single strand galvanized wire. And that'll get you going there. And you're using less posts, less wire, and you've got your animals trained on it, so they're keeping off it, they're respecting it. A lot of people look at the perimeters and go, well, we can put a hot wire around there quite quickly and easily, and then as the fencing is being replaced, they may just go completely electric. But you can add this onto your existing conventional fencing and put a very good perimeter barrier around, so that you've got your conventional fence, but you've also got a hot wire on there, and that keeps them off, and it'll prolong the life of your permanent fence as well. And if you've got that hot wire around the perimeter, you've really got something great to tap into then as well, because it's very quick and easy to then run, what they call a 10-minute fence off a hot wire going around the outside. Right, we're going to rotationally graze this paddock here, so I'm going to go in here with my temporary fence. You just hook it in, and you're using the power from the mains around the outside to power your little temporary fences. Great. It's saving costs, it's improving your containment, and it's getting your productivity up and using that grass to its maximum potential. Tip 8, stocking rates. What he said, they vary according to the land and the quality, but you can raise your stocking rates. And people who've started doing this, they've said, yep, we're getting our stocking rates up. So you're carrying more livestock units on the same land that you've got. So, you're making more out of what you've got, and, looking forward on where we're going to be without single farm payments, that's important. And also doing our bit for carbon. We don't know what they're going to do, but there is a lot of talk about carbon capture, and they can't fault us for doing this. Growing grass. It's not all going to be about growing trees. It's going to be about growing grass and managing our land and improving that top layer of soil, and that's good for everything, and all the wildlife as well, and those are important things to consider as we go into our new world order outside of the EU. It's all more effective than buying more land, and that's a scarce resource. So this is a great way of maxing what you've got. And tip 9, it's a bit of a cop out, you might say, but speak to one of our fencing experts or another fencing expert. Use their knowledge, the John Frizzels of this world. Use what they know and what they understand, because every farm is different and every system is going to be different. But these guys have been seen, done it all, and they know what to do and what to ask, the questions to ask of you. Let's quickly talk about energizers. I mean, I'm not really going to go into massive detail here, but first question, because you need an energizer to run your fence. You need some power, some electricity. So what power source are you going to use? You can go mains, you could go battery, you could go solar, you could go energizer. The energizer allows you to use mains, battery, or solar, because you can put a battery on it, or you can put some panels on it and go solar with it. So that gives you an option to choose. You know, you may buy it and then think a bit further on, I'm going to do something slightly different. So you may pick an energizer that does that. Or you may go for a main system. You know, you can control them on apps on your phone. It tells you where the faults are. You know, they're very, very efficient. They last a long, long time. They're an excellent way of covering a big unit. But you may be starting out. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with using batteries or solars. You know, smaller units that will get you going with it. Okay, with a battery, you've got to change the battery every now and again. That's why those solar units are really, really good. The technology in them now is very good. You don't need sunshine for them to run. Certainly ours run on 21 days of daylight without them running down, and they'll stay up. So you're not worried about, you know, when did we last change the battery? You know, they pretty much look after themselves. And that's really good, because it's saving you time, means you can do something else. So out of these variations that you've got, I mean, the question is, you know, what's the size of your property and what are you wanting to do? You know, are you ready to then, you know, you've already taken your step in electric and you've been using it and you want to go on to mains, or you're just starting out, you know, battery or solar. And the stock that you're trying to contain, you know, sheep are more difficult than cattle. And again, it's introducing the stock, you know, so there's ways and means that you can do that. So you can say, right, well, you know, we'll start doing it this particular time of the year, just to get them used to knowing there's a fence and a barrier. Because it's much, much easier when they know what's going on with electric, and then they'll respect it and keep off it. So the energizer, how do they actually work? You know, how do they actually give a shock? And why do they do it? Well, I mean, if I jump to this slide first, the cow here is connecting the circuit. So a well put up fence is essentially an open circuit to an energizer, like a bit like a light switch. So that's turned off. And when the animal makes the contact and puts her nose on the fence, then the circuit's closed and the light is on. And the pulse from the energizer, it's going back via the earth system. And that's really how it works. So once that circuit's complete, she's closed the circuit. It gives a safe, sharp, and hopefully a memorable shock. And she's going to say, I ain't going near that again. And, you know, if my mates are pushing me on my backside up against that, I ain't going near that. So she's going to hopefully come around and keep out of the way. And like I showed on that picture there, she is connecting the circuit and the earth return is pushing it back through. And John will talk to you a little bit later about some more of that. And if any of you guys who have quite a bit of experience in this area have got any questions about earthing and such, hopefully it's a good opportunity to find something out. You know, if something's not doing what it should be for you, it's often the earth. So now if we look at permanent and temporary fencing in electric, we'll compare and contrast the two. So what we've got here is a typical setup. We're on wooden posts, and there's many different sorts of insulators that can go on there. You know, there is a good choice out there. The end strain insulators, the heavy duty jaw clamps for connecting everything together. I mean, pretty much this is on wood. You've got inline strainers which allow you to then, you know, tighten up as and when you need to. There's cutout switches. So if you're wanting to do some work or do something, you can take out a certain area of it by simply just using the cutout switch. Underground cable, it's important to use good, I mean, like I said, on all of it, use good quality material and it won't let you down. But, you know, things like this to stop leakages. Spring gates, you know, there's a lightning arrestor. You know, it's not endless. You just sort of pick, you know, the components that will work for you and what you want to do. And then it all goes back, comes from the energizer, and obviously it's coming back with the earthing. But we're coming back to that in a minute. So, you know, you're electrifying at least one wire. It's going to be metal galvanizing on here. You're not going to move them very often. So you're probably putting them on wood posts. And that's how you're doing it. Or you may be putting some of this onto, like I said, the perimeter. So you might be, you know, putting a hot wire around and you're just putting some insulators around and running a hot wire around like that. So that's permanent. Then if we have a look at temporary, so immediately you sort of see that we're using reels to hold the wire, and we're going to be using poly wire or tape or rope. You're not going to be using metal galvanized. So you're using this stuff that's much lighter. You'll be using maybe some wooden ones here and there, I don't know. But often as not, they're tread-ins or they're pigtails. And then they're linked to an energizer to power it. And it's temporary and you're going to be able to move it around. Or you might hook it in, like I said, onto a perimeter that's got a hot wire, so you can just link it in and run it. But you're using geared reels as well, because that allows you to wind things in and move things around and do things quickly. So it's helping you with your rotational grazing, but you're also being able to use, you know, winter fodder crops and roots. And you can also do other things, you know, such as a bit of cell grazing in the winter, which is certainly what they were doing on the HDB farm I was at last week. And that's resting a lot more area. So, you know, come the spring, after lambing and such, you're in a better place to be. So, you know, that's other things you can be doing with electric. So that's permanent and temporary. And then the fence lines and the fence posts. So cattle up here, sheep and goats, pigs, what you're going to be using, poly wire, extreme wire, all of those for that. Sheep and goats, you're probably using poly wire or extreme wire, because that's giving you better conductivity for them. And the post types, I mean, you're often using, you know, pigtails on cattle, and you're using tread-ins and things that you can run more wires on for sheep and goats, because you're needing a few more wires. Whereas the cows, certainly they're used to it. You know, you can use a good pigtail with a, you know, with a single strand on the top will do the job nicely for you. And you know, parts, accessories, there's a lot out there, and really, if you're new to it, you know, talking to somebody who's already doing it, or talking to one of the fencing experts can help you through it. You know, it probably can be a bit daunting when you're thinking, crikey, do I need all this gear to start out with? No, you do not. You can start very, very simple and build up. You know, and so, you know, that's a misconception to think that you need all of that stuff on the shelf. You don't. You can start very, very simple, and then you can build up later on. You know, but a lot of this stuff, once you get into it, is good for saving your time and cost and effort and such. You know, there's a huge range of how you do your gates and that sort of thing, so you can move around really quickly. You know, and you're moving stock a lot of the time. And whilst you're moving the stock, you can also, you know, check everybody out. You know, you've got to check them once a day. So if you're moving them every now and again, you can check them at the same time. You know, when you're actually walking and moving animals through, you can see that everybody's okay. You know, and there's no feet or anybody hanging back who's not good for some reason. So we now talk about earthing and what's important about that. And the first thing to say is that it is perhaps the most important, or one of the most important components of an electric fence. The majority of problems would be a poor earth, and you should be putting an earth system at least 10 meters away from a building. You know, don't think that hooking into, you know, a big metal stanchion that's going down into ground, it's surrounded by concrete, you know, and it may not be getting as good an earth as if you get yourself away from the building by 10 meters. You know, find somewhere good to do it. You'll get a much better earth. The other benefit as well is to keep away from the energizer a little bit, and you reduce the chance of a lightning strike, which doesn't happen that often in this country, but you know, it's something to consider. So best practice for installing an earth system, you know, choose somewhere moist ground where, you know, it isn't going to dry out too quickly, because that can really affect the earthing that you're getting. And you might need additional earth stakes if it's really dry. You know it is. You know, and keep the earth system away from stock and machinery. You don't want to be running over this, because you know you ain't going to do it much good, and you don't want stock trampling over it either. You know, just put it somewhere where it's out the way of them, and it can just do its thing. You know, and space each earth stake out every 3 meters. The 3-2-1 rule is a really easy rule to remember. You know, a 3 meter space between each earth stake, 2 meter long galvanized earth stake into the ground. You know, you're going a long way in here, and a continuous length of underground cable to put them all together. You know, and that really makes it work. You know, larger energizers require more earth stakes, and clamps. You should be using them to make sure you've got that connection absolutely as good as you can get it. And as a rule of thumb, as you go up in size, for every 3 or 4 output joules, you need another earth stake. Now, measuring and monitoring current, I was going to ask John if he'd step in, because he can just explain this much better than I can. So, are you there, John?
I'm here. Thanks, Peter. That was great. Yeah, just on the earthing.
I'll jump back in after he's gone through this bit. But,
yeah, he's not going to go away. I'll keep you there.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Yeah, as Peter mentioned, earthing is the most important part of your electric fencing. With regard to earthing, now there's a simple way to test your earthing, especially with the mains, mainly with the mains energizer. Basically, you'll turn your mains energizer off, and then go sort of a good 100 meters away from the energizer, and then place, you want some good steel bars or something steel, and lay them onto the fence. Head back to your energizer, turn it on. You should have the load less than 2 kilowatts, 2000 volts. If it should be less than that. And then head over to your earth bars, to your earthing system, and then with a digital, hopefully you've all got a digital voltmeter, put that onto the earth bar cable, and just to check that, you should have less than 300 volts. So if you've got more than that, your earthing isn't adequate, and you'll need to add more earth bars. So that's just a simple way to check. You'll see in the diagram there, it explains it, but it's just a simple way to make sure your earthing system is working, is adequate. So you can add more earth bars, double check, and then once you get to the right sort of voltage, happy days, and you can head back out and know that systems all working and the circuits all working.
That's great.
Thanks, back to you, Peter.
Now, also, measuring and monitoring the current. would you go through this little one here?
Yeah, this is using one of our voltmeter remotes. So you've got a fault finder there, and it's basically explaining to you what the current and what load is on the fence. So the arrow is indicating that you've got 3.6 heading away. Find the fault, and then once you hit on the right side, you'll see at 6 is where you want to be. So I mean, with the bulk of energizers, you've got something like, I mean, one of our solars would be 9,800 kilowatts. With no load, so when you first turn it on with no load at all. A light load would be, you're looking at about 6,200, and a standard load, you're looking at about 4.5, 5,000. So that's where you want to be. So if you don't want to go any less than 3.5, you've got a problem. So under a sort of standard load, you're looking at something around what's got there, the 6. So if you've got a problem with these fault finders, it will give you an indication, especially if it's a large property, the arrow will indicate where the fault is. You'll find your fault, repair, and then you're up and running again.
And what typically could be a fault that you might be experiencing, John?
There's a bulk, there's a few of them, but at this time of year, I'd be looking at, especially with a lot of, grass being cut, a lot of grass on the fence. You want to sort of keep that off. There's trees. There's also high winds. Is probably the most typical one. High winds, a branch comes down. The other thing is corrosion. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned, with fencing, it's it's a professional, out there, you're professionally putting it up, so you want to use good accessories. So you look for good accessories, products with good high UV ratings, and get your accessories in. So it could be a short one, as I say, if you're not using good accessories, that you could have used. The fault with the insulator, it hasn't got a spark guard, it's not double insulated, so there's no spark guard there, so it's actually shorting on that staple or onto the post. A join, the other thing with joins, you always want to use a parallel join. I would always recommend a crimp sleeve, give you 100% strength, and the aluminium, so you've got a conductive, and you're not going to get resistance with the likes of a crimp sleeve. So joins, where you turn, where you stop, it's a bit like with fencing, it's where you start, stop, and turn are the key places to check.
Yeah, so start, stop, and turn. Yeah.
It's one of those with fencing. It's one thing to remember, with the insulation and gateways, of course, the other thing, key thing with gateways is there again, look for good accessories, good underground cable, double insulated. I'd always recommend if it's permanent and you're going under a roadway or a stone track, always just slide it through a bit of, hose pipe's not expensive. Slide the cable through that, roll it, roll over a good 200 as you bend it over, and then secure it so no water will get into it. So you're not going to have the problem with freezing in the winter with water getting into the cable. So as you say, key things to look at are good accessories and a good energizer and a good earth system. They're the three things. Once you got that, once you got that infrastructure in place, you won't look back.
Right. So any questions out there you've got for that or anything else on fencing and such, fire them in. So the measuring and monitoring checklist, is your energizer earthed okay? I think we've gone through that. Is your energizer powerful enough? I mean, again, that's where asking the expert or having a look at, what the range of the products you're looking at and match the right energizer to what you're trying to do. Look out for any shorts on the fence line, and is it built correctly in the first place? Make sure that it's constructed right. And, like I said, John mentioned, crimps and things, little things like that all add up. Look out for vegetation. You can see that. And your lead out cable, is that good enough? So that's a sort of a run through there. And then the distance powered and the earth requirement there. So there's a lot of information on here and a lot of energizers. But if we sort of group these ones that are the smaller ones, and we say, you're running a little AN20, which is doing about 800 meters, or going up to a bigger solar, to 10,000 meters. The earthing that you need isn't so big. You know, you're talking about one rod, 75 centimeters, and that'll do you. You still need it. You know, don't think you don't. And slightly bigger units, you're going from about 5,000 to 30,000 meters. So they're getting up a bit in size here. You're needing a good 1.5 meter earth rod and a clamp. You know, remember that we said putting a clamp on and making sure the connection is good there. So again, you know, not too many, but you're still needing to do it properly to get that earth that you need. And then you get into the bigger area, you know, the bigger 30,000 to 460,000 meters. I mean, the 46W is massive. You know, that's a monster. But you're needing a number of earth rods and connection clamps. With some of the bigger units, you're needing 3 earth kits and rods and several clamps. So, you know, like we said, with the bigger stuff, you've got to do it properly. Otherwise, it's not going to do the job for you as much. If you're starting out, you know, it's not a blocker. You just need to make sure you put an earth in the right place. You know, get it into moisture, get it down deep enough, and then you're okay. You know, and some of the little ones, I mean, you're using, you know, the tripod that's actually standing on, and you're just putting your earth clip onto there and making sure it's in enough moisture, and then you're okay there. So after sales and service center, I mean, a little bit about us. We've already heard John speak. You know, he's based in the south of England, but covers the whole country. Doesn't matter where anybody is. We have other people around as well. We're based in Selkirk, and we're there to help you. We also have the Data Mars Livestock Training Academy. I think this started life for our business partners, our agri merchants, who we sell all of our Speed-Right products through them. But I think we very quickly realized that we should open this out to everybody. So it's not just our trade in-store people, you know, the merchants that you go and speak to, but also the end user. So we've opened this out. You can register on academy.livestock.datamars.com. And you can learn in little modules about this area of fencing and other products as well. But it's very interactive, and you know, we'd certainly welcome anybody wanted to jump on and start doing these modules. You know, they're good to do. You know, and certainly the youngsters would enjoy them as well. And just finally, a little bit about Data Mars Livestock and, you know, our vision for empowering farming. You know, we want to be the world leaders for you in harnessing the data, because data is key to get the efficiencies that we need in this new world order, you know, and as we're going forward, because it's measuring what you're doing and making sure that it's going in the right direction for you. So whether that's through active tags, you know, or reading, weighing EID through our True Test equipment, and any of our electric fence stuff, you know, and we're looking at using infrastructure to push this information, you know, including fence lines, to push this information back to HQ, your farm office, up in the cloud, and then back onto apps that are in your farm office to then enable you to capture this information about your livestock and, you know, what they're doing and the improvements that you can be making, and certainly on, you know, the daily live weight gain, and, you know, getting more out of what you've got, so that, you know, you become more efficient, and it also makes your life a bit easier. You know, that's something that we want to do for you as well. So thank you for listening, and I think we're now back to Mark for any questions we might have.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much. I wasn't sure I'd pushed the right button there. Thank you. Thank you. That's been great, Peter, and it helped it out by John there. Just a quick question on that last slide where you had lots of stakes going around for your earth. Was that correct? And you're saying it was 200 to 500,000 meters distance. So you could put 500 kilometers of fencing in with that.
Oh, and our big 46 joule, it's 460 kilometers of fencing, 260 hectares, yes. So that's we've just launched that one. These anything above 15 joules is for official use only. So we require, to give you some advice on these big mains energizers, but they're really cost effective and they really perform. So yes, they can produce those sorts of figures. You're looking at 10 earth bars for something like that with a good infrastructure. As Peter rightly said, 3-2-1 rule. But the key thing is the moisture. You can get them well away from build, but look for the moisture. You can always run a line down your fence. If you haven't got that moisture, you can always look at what we call an earth wire return system, where you're using one of your wires, you don't insulate it, and we can run a complete earth system around your farm if it's that dry. But fortunately enough, in the UK.
What sort of distances might you'd be looking for if you've got, say, 200 cow herd or 1,000 ewes? Are you looking? Is there a sort of rule of thumb about what you might be looking at?
Well, we normally, 1 joule will give you 10 kilometres of fencing. So intensive grazing, you can bring them down to a tight area. As Peter said, it's more cost effective. You can get down, I think it's sort of 39p for a sort of a perimeter, good high quality, high tensile wire. We've got, like the Vincil tube, to get your cost. If it's a cost element, we've got products which are still effective, but can drop that cost. But it really just depends on your pasture and what pasture you've got and just what you want to graze. So,
and you're running the portable ones for breaking the paddocks or fields up. You're running them off that perimeter mains wire, are you?
If you haven't got, if you've got the infrastructure of permanent, you can break it down, and if you've got that infrastructure there. But if you've got areas where you haven't got a permanent system, then you'd bring in, like Peter rightly said, that the solars are very popular to do a block, or if you wanted to run a block when you've got like a hedge or stone wall, and you haven't got the infrastructure. But if you look at it, the key thing is planning, as Peter rightly said. You can start it very simple, small battery energizer. And you can get going. You can rotationally graze, and away you go. And as you sort of get more confident, and the animals are more, you can grow from that. But the larger properties, you'd be looking at, being cost effective. You'd want to look at a good permanent infrastructure, especially the dairy herds. Then you're looking at laneways, your gate systems. That's when you really want to sit down and get it right for you, where your water is, and just how you want to put that infrastructure there to get the best out of it.
So I started off thinking this was going to be talking about ability to control grass, but you're now also talking about having a cheaper way of fencing and dividing up the farm fields and paddocks, with and prolonging the life of that, in terms of the fact that they get the wear and tear of large stock, but particularly cattle leaning against things.
Especially.
There's another question come in that's about I guess either animal welfare or animal learning. How long, is there a particular age at which you would introduce animal to electric fencing? Do they pick it up better? And how long do they get used to it? Do they get used to it?
So, electric fencing is psychological. So, animal, deer and that sort of thing, quite smart. They get onto it straight away. But sheep can be a bit slow. But to be honest, your lambs, it's the key thing there is to put your posts a bit closer, and just put a bit more infrastructure. You might look at a 4-line or 3-line definitely for sheep, but it depends on what you're grazing. They do take to it. They're not all silly. The enemy gets is a zap, and once they've had that, they normally keep away from it. Interesting is they learn from one another. So say.
So you're saying you could put weaned lambs behind it?
Weaned, I would just be a bit, depending when the ewes are. I wouldn't sort of have the ewes in Too close, you'll find, yeah, on the other side. But, yeah.
Yeah, when I was on the HDB strategic farm last week, I mean, that's what they were saying. He's deliberately putting his ewes out of earshot,
yeah,
and putting his lambs back into the same paddock. And they're on electric, and he's doing that because he wants the ewes out of the way, and he wants the lambs in somewhere where they know where the water is and they know the field. And he says they feel that they're cutting down the stress and they're getting over it quicker, you know, and just getting on with the job, i.e. eating decent feed.
Yeah.
And
so
just forgetting about their mum.
If we take that to a dairy beef example, where the animals, the calves are weaned early, you'd be quite content about having those sorts of aged animals behind electric fence, and they'd pick it up quickly.
Yeah,
John.
I mean, the key thing is feed. I mean, as Peter rightly said, is feed and water. I mean, at the end of the day, if they're happy, you know, they're not going to bother it. You're going to forget to move, or you know, you're going to have problems. But as I say, they're putting a bit of infrastructure there, and either when there's areas of, you know, a bit of stock pressure near gateways, I just add and maybe put your posts a bit closer together. But when you're out, and you know, it's not, you know, you can open them up a bit. So there's not a hard and fast rule. Every property is different, and a lot of farmers' livestock are different. But you know, rule of thumb is, you know, they're happy. It's a psychological. So I mean, they're going to be a lot happy behind that, and some rusty old barbed wire that's not strained up and you know, not doing a good job. So for me, it's electric all the way.
Yeah. So the with regard to your earthing, we've got a question come in here about saying a part of the field that they want to use electric fencing in, or some of the fields, can become wet and boggy. What would be the conditions under which you'd say electric fencing isn't suitable in that sort of situation?
Well, your earthing, I mean, we say we want moist soil, but they don't want to be sort of floating, as in not sure how wet it's going to get. But then again, electric, you know, well insulated, you know, you can cover across, you know, if it's wet lying, you know, well insulated pigtails or tread-ins, you can sort of keep it away.
So the wire's out of the water. If the wire's out of the water, it'll still function.
Yeah, it'll still function. Yes, yeah.
And so the key thing I had a question myself about these pigtails. Those are the stakes with a curl on the end, and you put one wire through them. Is that right?
That's right. Bulk of it for dairy. There's a lot used for dairy side of you know, livestock management, and then normally tread-ins are normally the sheep type of things. I mean, you've got many different forms now. You've got, you know, there's fiberglass available. There's plastic, and there's steel. You know, there are quite a few steel posts coming on stream now because of getting hold of good quality timber posts. It's not always easy. So, but there again, we've got, you know, there's insulators to fit all those. We've got steel post rod insulators, different items for different applications.
Many years ago, when I was a student in New Zealand, they had a thing called FlexiNet, which sheep farmers like, because sheep can push through wires that have got a distance between the posts. But is that still a modern product, or do you think we've now got better systems that you can just use wires and these tread-in stakes that you work across the field?
Yeah, I mean, it's come on now. I mean, the energizers, you know, all the manufacturers producing have come on leaps and bounds. So, you know, and the other good thing is the, you know, likes of high tensile wire, you know, it's got a vanadium enhanced with an aluminium mix, so it's conducting really well. And the poly wires have come on as well with what we've got Extreme. It's got stainless steel, there's also some copper wires in, so it conducts really well. So the nets are, you know, the UV on them as well is not brilliant, but I mean, yeah, they're still used. They're probably a little bit more on poultry. They're still used in some areas, but now I think we've moved on from that, to be perfectly honest.
It's not what you'd call the industry standard for sheep then. Yeah.
No, it's more, you know, smaller areas, but you know, now with there's a lot of systems out there. There's a lot of reeled systems, quad bike systems. You know, there's some very good systems in the market.
I've got a question here about rotational grazing. Is there the risk that giving these animals this short break and then moving them on to another one quite frequently, does that mean the animals will be under quite a bit of pressure with all the competition? So they eat out, say, the clover, and the pasture that regrows isn't quite so good?
I think you need to look at what's there, and make sure that you've got enough in front of them, i.e. when you get on to the next move. And it's what you're doing with those animals. If they're lambs that you're needing them to do, you need plenty in front of them. If you're moving ewes on and they're in reasonable condition and you're wanting to just keep them where they are, or subsequently they're ewes that need to come on, and you need, 6 weeks every body condition score to get there. It's a sort of a factor. Does that sort of answer it, or?
I think so. I think the question to me relates to whether you mentioned something about having improved pasture quality, but the question came in saying, would the pressure might act against that? What's your experience gone from New Zealand?
Yeah, I mean, you put especially lambs, you put them into, and there's a, I mean, we've moved on to sort of herbal lays, but it's some lovely clover there. Of course, they'll go for that straight away. The key thing there is to speak to your sort of the germinals of this word, your seed, and look for some good quality pastures, and using using rotational grazing to manage that is really much where you're at. In New Zealand, there's like plantain, there's all sorts of different, a lot of herbal lays now as well. And also we've got likes of lucerne, come on leaps, but that's, you've got to be careful with that type of crop with regard to the dry and what soils you have. But managed right, it really does make a difference. It's all about talking about the weight gains in productivity and profitability. So it's important, but it's all about managing your pasture. But and also if it gets very dry.
Yeah, I think you're right. The chicories and plantains are coming on in popularity, but sort of go back a step, and if you're set stocking and then you switch to rotational grazing, you're encouraging some of the better stuff to get a hold and come through. And that's how you're improving what you're getting, because you're not getting all that rough and thatch. Some of the smaller grasses and the clovers and such are starting to get in there. And you're not battering it to death with nitrogen, so you're giving that a chance to come through. And you've got your pH right, that's important. And then you've got your NPK. And again, like I said, if you can use muck, if you've got plenty of it. If not, there's plenty of other stuff on the market. It doesn't just have to come out of a nitrogen bag. And then you're improving your mixture on what you've already got. That's alternatively, to ripping it out and putting plantain and chicory, which, I'm not saying there isn't a case for it, when you're getting up to that point, definitely. But, what about some of the areas where you can't necessarily plow and do that? Get your pH, your NPK right, then, possibly spray and, then direct drill. Where you're around it, you're looking after that top level of soil and improving it. You don't even have to pick the stones when you do that.
I got a couple more questions. I'm wanting to end soon, but I'll just fire two more if you can take them, please. One was about your Datamars Academy, and the question is specifically about is that something that's free for people to use? And would that be the sort of thing you'd encourage farmers to be, getting some of their farm staff to use as sort of professional development?
Definitely.
If you can, absolutely. It's free. You can log on, you do the units.
So is it about using electric fencing or setting up electric fencing?
Yeah, many areas that are covering, and it's growing all the time. They're putting some animal health modules on there, and there's a lot of weighing and EID reading modules as well as electric fencing and everything. Yes.
Cool. And then the last one related to the fact we have this idea that you move a fence forward to give animals a fresh break. Are you also got another wire behind them to move off the area they've just grazed if you're in the middle of a field, say? So the first third, you move them to the second third, and you have a wire behind them and in front of them. But what's the sort of normal way that people do that?
Yeah, it's a break fence. I mean, the rule of three is, graze the 3-leaf stage, 3 days max grazing, and that'll leave for 3 weeks. So yeah, you want to back fence. So that's the best form. Yeah, I mean they're only going to, especially if you get a wet spell, you don't want them back on that. You want to give them
that's
some
a great that's a great point though, to then be able to move across.
Yeah, you've got to be flexible.
Masses of infrastructure, because you're just following up with the brake line, the brake wire, like you said. Yeah.
That 3 week rest is important. I'm just going to mention also, of course, we've got heading to a bit of a heat wave at the moment. When you've got a severe drought, you've got to look at the area, and then you might have to open it up and then look for a block. Where you can open it up a bit more. And there again, if it's very wet, you don't really want to ruin a good block. And the other key thing is when you head into autumn is the resting period as well. You just don't want to hammer it too hard.
Yeah. So you've got these tools. You then need to apply to them some understanding of how you apply them in those different seasons, or a situation like you're saying, an impending drought that's coming. You start to say, well, I need to actually manage this a bit differently. So can they get that advice? I guess they can get it from your specialist, but does it also talk about some of those things in the academy?
Not as, I mean, AHD, but there's some good experts out there. The academy is more about infrastructure, why fence, similar to our why, and the idea, it's a bit more about why, when. But yeah, that more UK based infrastructure, I would always recommend you speak to to be honest, the farmer over the fence is always a good one to have a chat to. Farmers like to talk to farmers, but there's a lot of experts out there. I know the AHDB are very good, the advice they give as well.
Farmers learn well from other farmers, don't they? Absolutely.
That's right. Discussion groups, and they work very well. So
yeah. Well, I mean, that's been great. I think you've given us a great summary of what the technology is here. You've given us some nice simple rules of thumb. I like the one about where your fence is a problem. It's going to be where it starts, stops, it turns, or in gateways. Nice simple rules. You've got your 3-2-1 rule. You had your 3s rule. So there's some real simple messaging here that you've got, and you can give to people who are picking up this sort of technology. The other thing I liked about it was your ability saying start simple, use good kit, but don't try and do everything all at once. And then as you get more confident, build on it. And I think that's the right way, I guess, with any technology. Don't be let down by the equipment first off and burn your fingers, and then just build up. So thank you very much for your time and effort for that. And I'd like to wind this webinar up, and it will be available through the GrassCheckGB website and also through the Datamars one. Thank you very much, John Brazil, and thank you very much, Peter Stoker.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us, the audience.